Director for New York State. And I want to thank you for joining us tonight for our chapter chat. We are thrilled to have the president of NASW, Joyner, with us. I know you all are in for a treat. We got a little taste of what she's going to talk about, and I'm excited to be here to hear it. So I am going to hand it over very quickly to Amelia, and she's going to tell you how to interact with us tonight, and then we'll hand it over to Mitt.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sam. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have our president, Ms. Joyner, here for this chapter chat. I'm going to go over what I'm sure you all know how to do, which is how to use Zoom, but it's always nice to have a little recap or refresher. So please, while you're not speaking, please remember to remain muted so we cut off on that background noise. Mitt really intends to have this be a conversation, have this be a discussion. This is not just about what NASW is telling you what the future of social work is. We need to hear that from you too. So when you do want to speak, feel free to unmute yourself and speak up organically. You can also use your reactions if you want to put your cursor over the bottom of your Zoom screen and show us some of those reactions. I also do want to mention that I'm turning it on now. Our closed captioning is available if you need to turn that on as well. Of course, if it's not a time to speak and you want to write in some comments and questions, use that chat box, keep on talking. And before I send it over and hand it over to Ms. Joyner, I just want to ask everyone to throw into the chat box where you're from, where you're joining us from. We have people from all over the US, I'm sure, maybe beyond, as well as why you're here. What are your hopes for the future of social work? You know, what do you want to hear us talking about for the future of social work? And we'll make sure that, you know, we're going to try and include that in on this conversation. So thank you all again for joining us. And I'm going to hand it over to Mitt.
Well, hello, everybody. I am glad to be here this evening. But before we begin, I'm going to ask us just to take a few seconds for a moment of silence for the 8 people that were murdered in Atlanta, Georgia. You know, hate is still alive here in the United States and across around the globe. It is something that I'd hope to talk with you about this evening is what is the role of social work in making sure that these hate crimes and things that are happening in our country, our nation, and around the globe, that we are at the forefront of change. Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a word that is the social work word. If you kind of go on IFSW, it is the international word that we're using this year for International Social Work. World Social Work Day was just yesterday. And I've been using Ubuntu in all of my speeches for the last, I guess, 3 to 4 months. And I will use it throughout the year. Ubuntu means I am because we are. I am because we are. Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu started talking about Ubuntu, although it had been there 2,000 years in Africa, and it has different names as you move through the different countries in Africa. When there was the end of apartheid, and people who had went to the mountains came out of the mountains in South Africa, they talked about the principle of Ubuntu. I am because we are. What is the new South Africa going to look like? And it has to be based on people. Ubuntu means that we're all a sense of the same humanity, that we're all connected. We are connected through ourselves and our families and our neighborhoods and our nation, but we're also connected to the earth and to all things that are and how we exist. So Ubuntu means taking that principle and making sure whoever you are is because of where you've come from and what you're going to be. And then whoever you are, that you have to set the stage for the next generation. Our humanity is tied together. And we have to always remember that Afrocentric philosophical proverb, Ubuntu. So tonight I am because we are. I am here because I am the National Association of Social Workers president of the national chapter with over 55 chapters throughout the United States, representing over 100,000 individuals. And that is a large task because there's nobody that thinks the same in that 100,000 people. So representing that diversity is really, really difficult, but possible. If we remember that of all those 110,000 people, that they all commit to the code of ethics. So I represent the code of ethics. I don't represent this opinion or that, red state, blue state. I represent our code of ethics. And to make sure that we live out our code of ethics is my task. And so I actually became a leader long time ago in other arenas. I led the Council on Social Work Education. I was the president of that association, as well as the Association of Baccalaureate Program Directors. I led the department in my school. I was the chair and director of the social work program at Westchester University. I was a homeroom rep. So I've always been in leadership positions, and I feel comfortable about being in them because I want to make sure that we are doing what we should be doing. So tonight, it was great to have this opportunity to come and engage with you, to talk about how do you reimagine social work? Where do you see social work going? What is the role that you're going to play? What will you need from your association? Remember, NASW, National Association of Social Workers, we represent you, your opinions, your desire. We go on the Hill, we speak for you. We speak for you not only in the national office where we are, we go to the federal government and talk to the senators and representatives, but also into the state houses. Our chapter EDs are in the state houses and they represent you. We are one association. So when you join NASW, you're joining your state chapter, you're joining the national chapter, you are also participating in the International Federation of Social Workers. I serve as president of that only because I'm president of NASW. And so I serve as president of the North America region. So my counterparts is Canada and Greenland. And I represent all of them as well. In fact, on next Monday, the 22nd, we are having a Ubuntu Welcome to the Social Work Profession with IFSW. It's free. It's at 1 o'clock. Please join us. We'll have our Canadian sisters and brothers on this call, and we'll talk about loan forgiveness and all of the things you need to know about social work. So join us on next Monday. This is Social Work Month, and we want to give you more everything that you asked for. And some young members ask about, why would I join an association? What can I get? How do I network with people? What types of jobs do I get? So we just decided, you know what? Canada and I decided, let's just do something. So we're going to do that next week. So I'm going to want you all to put questions in the chat that talk about where you see us going. Of course, you know, I probably wouldn't even be on this forum if we weren't all shut at home, right? So the one thing that we have learned this whole year is that Zoom is something that will never go back. I mean, we'll never go back to just going to a place and just speaking to some people. We will always be opening it up to as many people that can come through this platform, because if I could get frequent flyer miles, I would, for all the Zoom calls I have been on. I mean, I'm on a Zoom call in London, a Zoom call in California, one in Tennessee. I'm all over the world. And if I could get a mile for every Zoom call I'm on, I would be in first class every time I took a trip. That is how often I'm engaged on this platform. As I said, I started this morning at 8 o'clock. And if you've noticed, one of my eyes is red. It's not as red as it used to be, but last week, unfortunately, I broke a blood vessel in my eye. My ophthalmologist said too much time on Zoom trying to find the numbers. So I have been taking the weekends off so that I can give my eye a rest. They had suggested that I wear a patch, but a patch and a mask is just too much for me. So I just have elected not to do that. So I hope that you will feel comfortable enough to put your cameras on, because it's so hard to talk to people who I just see all of your pictures. But if you're doing something at home, I understand. But if you can click your cameras on, please join us and please begin to ask me the questions. Now, this is not going to be a binary thing where it's going to be Mitt, you. We're going to think these things through. I don't have all of the answers. I don't know all of the things that we should be doing at NASW or we have done, but I do take the responsibility because I am the president, and anything that comes to me, I will always address it to the staff at NASW, be it or whoever it is. But really what I want to think through is, what is the social worker of the future going to be? I mean, the future, and I even mean the future of a few months from now, as people, more and more people come out of their home from COVID, we have to get ready for that. And it's not going to be a good time. You know, there are going to be people for the very first time that even leave their homes in a year. There are people who are trying to navigate, how do I get a vaccinated for the virus. And it's not because they don't want it. It's because in every state, it's been sporadic. Some have some here, some have this. You have to be on the computer around 1 o'clock in the morning before they release to let people in. And then you have to be able to go on the computer and you have to know what a live link is. So think of older adults who just think that they're going to get a notice. They don't know that you got to hit a live link and then go into that link and re-register again. And so they haven't been getting the vaccine. And we do know, earlier today, I said race equity must be at the center of everything that we do. And I will say that again, race equity must be at the center of everything we do. Because the word disparities that we use is just another word for a certain race was left out. That's why the disparities exist. So when we look at the COVID vaccine and we see that brown and black people and indigenous people are not receiving the vaccine, it is because where the vaccine is being placed. And what we're learning, and why I think President Biden has just released that everybody's going to get vaccinated, because we're learning it is who you know. Right? That old network, oh, the vaccine's good, where the pharmacists say, I'm getting a batch tomorrow, and the people call all of their friends and they have access first, and then it fills up. And so you don't always have access to the vaccine and to the registration process, because you may not know, or your daughter may not be dating the pharmacist's son or daughter, and they don't get that information. So we've seen the disparities exist there. We see the economic pandemic that we're going through. For the very first time, people are accessing food lines that have never done so before. But they're also now accessing PPP money. And again, when we look at the data, Black, brown, indigenous people did not receive the PPP money, although many of them had small businesses. Because of access. They didn't know the bankers. They didn't know the lenders. They didn't understand who you go to get the PPP money. And again, another online procedure. So this time under the Biden administration, they were really kicking it out to make sure that all people had access. And then of course, racial injustice. Yes, brown and black and indigenous people are murdered more often than not during an arrest. And we just happened to see a young man who killed 8 people, and he was taken into custody, but he wasn't brown, black, or indigenous. So once again, and I listened to an officer talk about how they were trained, and they're trained that these people are going to literally kill you. So their mind is always on their gun. We've got to change that. every system that we have, and even our own, our social work system, racism exists. I have said time and time again that racism is the human stain of America. People get up, put that shirt on, know that stain's there. Everybody sees it, they wear it, but nobody tries to eradicate it. And as your NASW president, I am trying to eradicate racism, classism, sexism, ageism, homophobia, Islamophobia, anything with an IST. I believe it is my job to wipe out. That's what I spend my time on. And I know that I should be probably spending it a little bit more on operations and to make sure it's good, but that's what social workers do. We are change agents. And if you came into this profession and you don't want to make change, then perhaps this profession is not the right profession for you. Right now, we have in 42 states over 254 bills that have gone to various state capitals to suppress the right to vote. Now, to suppress the right to vote. We want our state houses. I mean, I just saw in Pennsylvania where they put, do you believe in race equity? And you, of course, you would say yes for that, right? But then the other parts of the amendment all dealt with stripping back the power of the governor so that the governor couldn't say, okay, we're going to count these votes.
But racial equity.
That the governor is going to count these votes.
The same.
So I don't know who that's just the echo coming out from somewhere. But and also about the pandemic, that the governor can't shut down or can't tell us to wear a mask. And so in Pennsylvania now, it's important that I write a little editorial, because if you vote for one part of that amendment, of course, we all want to make sure that race and there's equity. But if you vote for that one part, you're voting for the other parts as well. And so you kind of have to know how Congress people are manipulating people, because you see that one part and you'll be like, yeah, you know, everybody should, you know, yes, Pennsylvania should represent all people. I don't know what that is in case somebody might be breaking into us. But they want it. But so what they're doing is to say, okay, if you vote for that, then you're voting to strip the governor's powers back. So I think we've been hacked. Do you think we've been hacked? I think we've been hacked.
I'm gonna get them out.
Okay.
Racial equity is.
There we go.
Okay.
Racial equity is equal to communism. Fuck it.
Well, so we can say racial injustice is equal to communism. F it, right? I mean, is that what they said? We do know, and we have following, so people know what I say. So sometimes these hackers kind of click themselves to wherever I'm going.
Sorry, we've never had it yet.
Okay, Amelia, that's okay. We'll take our time, but anyway, we'll continue. Hey, it might get played over in another country. So the fact of the matter is what we heard today also, and if you turn on the news, you're seeing again about the 2020 election and some of the congressmen that have paid particular trying to discredit Biden. And the report was just released today. And of course, it points to Devin Nunes, who we all knew, and it points to Johnson, who yesterday, Senator Johnson made a statement by which he said that that the insurrection he was not afraid of the individuals who came into the state to the Capitol, because they were really friends of Donald Trump's, and they were just really kind of upset that he lost the election, and he wasn't afraid. He knew that they wouldn't do anything to them. Yet he said, he admitted, and he said, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but if they were Black Lives Matter or Antifa, yeah, I'd be afraid. And what he went on to say, what he really said was, white people aren't afraid of white people. They can come in and they can leave. They can tear up the Capitol. So what he really said was that people went into the Capitol on January the 6th, and there are people who died, people who literally died, people who were pressed against the wall, people who lost fingers, people whose discs are crushed. I mean, some of the things that have happened to those officers is yet to go out full public, where they defecated on the floor and smeared it along the Capitol, where they broke windows and took public records, and yet they were able to walk in and walk out because Johnson wasn't afraid of those people, right? Because really those people were on the hunt for brown and black people, Nancy Pelosi, and for the vice president, because they didn't do what they wanted to say. And he didn't give a darn, I think, about those. But on the other hand, he said if Black Lives Matter came in there, he would be afraid. He would want people, in my mind, to shoot them, to do whatever is necessary, because he was afraid. And then we have some people in America that says, why do Black Lives matter? Because you just had a senator who everybody pays their taxes to say, I'm not afraid of Proud Boys and all of these white supremacists, but if anybody's representing Black people, I am. That's what he said. And that's why we wear this human stain, because you have the power to change it. You have the power to go into your the conversation starts at your dinner table with your family. The conversations go into your communities, into your clubs, into your girlfriend and boyfriend groups. The conversation goes into the Capitol and goes around the world. And we need not only brown and Black people to say that, we need whites, we need everybody to say that. The strength of America is our diversity. The strength of America is our diversity. If we were to pour water into a tub, all people would rise up. Not just half the tub, not just a quarter of a tub, but all people will rise up. So social workers, you have that responsibility in your code of ethics to be the change that you want, that you seek, and to eliminate discrimination and racism and ageism and sexism and all of those other isms, classism. That's the job that you'd agreed to take on as social workers. So I'm going to stop there and get some questions.
All right, we have a lot of comments, a lot of questions in our chat box. I just want to, before I go and read, it's much better when we have social workers out in the community speaking to us. So if you would like to, if you've written in a comment, something that you want to talk about the future of social worker, question how we're going to address that, please, now is your time.
Do I type?
Hello.
Hello?
Hi, I'm Dr. Owens King. I'm a faculty member at Salisbury University, and I'm just so pleased to be on this call. Thank you for allowing us this opportunity to talk. So I wanted to put this out there to you, Ms. Joyner. How do we manage preaching to the choir, so to speak? Oftentimes, the things that social workers and people who are drawn to the social work profession believe in are the things that you highlighted, right? Around everyone being important. We believe, on average, right? Social workers believe these positions and line up with the NASW Code of Ethics and your state Code of Ethics. But how do we move from preaching to people who actually agree with us to getting the ear of those who really don't get what you were just saying, what you were just talking about?
So, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that, what we're doing even on Zoom is we don't need to Zoom with each other. We need to Zoom with our communities. So we need to be at our school board meetings and making sure that the curriculum is inclusive, speaking up so that when and review the book list that's coming out for kids to study or projects to study. We need to go to the medicine and talk with the doctors. I know I sit on a panel with a bunch of doctors, talk about race equity, talk about mental health, talk about racism. It really affects people's mental health. We talk about it at our communities. Years ago in the 70s, they would have these things called coffee clatches, and you go and you'd have coffee with individuals. We need to go to our churches and demand to host a church meeting. Church is the most segregated day on the calendar. Church. Because everybody goes to their own church. We had the Black Baptist Church, the White Baptist Church, the Black Catholics, the White Catholic, and we got the White Protestants, and then we have the other. So we have that on Sunday. And so we need to be able to say and host something at our church to talk about what divides us. I like to have calls, and I try to do these essential chats with Mitt, and I have them, but I always bring race into it, right? So you can't always advertise race, because some people are going to be like, nah, I'm not going there today. I'm tired. That's enough for me, right? So you have to pick a topic. But remember what I said earlier, race equity has to be the center of everything we do. So no matter what it is, you have to give it that moment where you talk about race. Well, how many people of color do you have coming? Or why did you just make that statement? Or how come our church, our church and everybody looks the same? Have we thought of, I actually years ago worked here with our church council, and I'm going to heaven because of this. It was all of the ministers of all the churches. We had the Ku Klux Klan marched in our town, and the church leaders wanted to have something so they could all talk to their parishioners about should they go. They called me as the head of a social work program at Westchester University to come and talk to them. And then actually I stayed with them for over 18 months. And what we did is I got the Black Baptist Church and the White Baptist Church to partner up, and to have every third Sunday, and I'm not Baptist, so had every third Sunday where their churches would come together. And then they began to have programs. Actually, the two ministers became best friends, and they began to see a shift in how each other thought about each other. It started because the Ku Klux Klan was marching in Westchester. And it started because they were all like, what are we going to do? And I need to talk to my parishioners. And then we kind of talked about, how can you do some cross-fertilization? So it's things like that that will change the community's mind, right? If you have Quakers are very good for anti-racist work. I mean, they actually started that years ago. So have some Quaker meetings. I used my university. I was at a PWI. I held all kind of discussions with my students. I brought a course to Westchester University called Race Relations, where we only taught about African Americans, Native Americans, Asian Pacific Islanders, and Latinos. And we got it to be went through CAPC, a curriculum and policy committee, and it became a requirement for the social work majors. And then other departments wanted to have it as a requirement. The problem is I was one person, so I had to train other professors to teach that course. And it wasn't really the course content, it was the person who delivered the course that really mattered. It's still a course today. I still have students, and I no longer work there, that call me and say, that race relations course I had. So there's everywhere you are, there's opportunities to reach across the aisle and develop something. And I'm looking at Zoom and I keep saying, wow, even the vaccine, we should be going to our health departments and saying, we can help distribute the vaccine, and then to talk to people about that, right? And about the equity of the vaccine. Right now, older adults are pissed off because they're like, wow, we need this. We're dying from this most, and we can't get access because we can't get on these computers 2 and 3 times a day. So we have their attention. So we talk to them and say, not only can you get on there, guess who else can't get on there? So those are the ways that I think we have to think about. The most out of the box idea you come up with. Most out of the box. Book groups. Book groups are nice. Start a book group. Don't start with the native son. Start with something that's palatable to everybody. Movie watching groups. And then you bring these communities together. And then you can bring some change. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're most appreciated. Anybody else have some ideas on how we can bring those to the table that need to be at the table? I'm going to tell you a little thing we're going to try at NASW is I noticed that a lot of these platforms on race that, again, just as was stated, it's the choir, right? It's the choir speaking, and it might mean that there's a whole lot of people who are on there, but only usually few people talk. So what we're thinking about is doing some master classes on it, right? To break the groups down into 10 or 15 and 20, and to have some master teachers just sit on the Zoom and everybody can talk to each other, because no one wants to be embarrassed or gain a reputation or say the wrong thing. And we know that we have to have the coursework from 101 level all the way to advanced level. So we know we have some novice people. I know that when I go out to NASW chapters in the Midwest, there's hardly any people of color there, hardly any at all. So I do know that they're less likely to get on a Zoom call about racial equity or about white supremacy, because they just, their ideas are completely different. So we have to scale it back and make it work for them. Anybody else have any ideas?
I see we've had Mia. I'm wondering if you would feel so bold as to unmute and kind of speak your comment, or I can read that as well.
Hi, my question really related to Black Lives Matter and the resistant movement that you touched upon. Right now, I feel like Black Lives Matter is looked at as this new iteration of resistance. And sometimes we forget that historically, each act of resistance was bold and new and jarring to the communities. So whether you're looking at Martin Luther King marching across Selma in a suit, that was jarring, or young African-American men and women along with their collegiate cohorts and allies who might be of other races marching through city capitals, that's jarring. And so I often am curious about how do we make sure that our resistance is intergenerational? So it isn't just about the march, but it's about being able to leverage the expertise, knowledge, skill sets, and positions that the people that came before us hold, so that real change can happen. Because individuals like you, Dr. Joyner, and so many others are in the rooms where change is discussed, where policies are written, where change can really happen. And so how do we make sure that the young people feel connected to the generations before in a real way?
Well, this is the problem with history. I hate Black History Month because we only learn about African-American history in 1 month, when in actuality, that's why I love my race relations course, when you integrate it and you infuse it and you understand that as Native Americans were being pushed back to the reservations, they walked right across plantations that had slaves on it. Black Lives Matter the day in 1614 when we came to the United States in shackles. And so Frederick Douglass is an abolitionist. Harriet Tubman is an abolitionist. Fannie Lou Hamer is an abolitionist. And some of those names people don't even really know about. Every social worker is an abolitionist, or at least should be. We should be working ourselves out of a job. We should be doing things so that our profession, child welfare, no longer exists if we can pump up families and have them take care of themselves. But our history has been stolen. And not only our history, the history of Native Americans. Very few people realize that there were over 493 different tribes that lived on Turtle Island before Christopher Columbus, who thought he was lost and in another place, came and called this America, right? And those tribes lived together in peaceful coexistence all throughout the United States. Also, Latinos, the Mexican-American War, go back and research it. Don't believe Joyner's story. Go back and do your own research. I believe in primary sources. But we have to realize that California, Florida, all of Texas, those states belong to Mexico. And at the strike of the pen, at the end of the Mexican-American War, we signed a treaty. Had we lived up to our treaty agreement today, both of us, Latinos would be able to speak English and we would be able to speak Spanish because that was in the agreement. Far too many people do not know that Chinese people were brought here in the United States to build the railroad. Yet we imposed the Chinese Exclusion Act time and time again so they weren't allowed to bring their families. People fail to understand that when we were going into war in World War II, that we signed an executive order 9066 that rounded up all Japanese people and all of the aliens or anybody that sympathized with them, moved them out of their houses, put them on trains, and took them to other parts of this country where they lost everything. See, we really don't know American history. And when we don't know American history, one group of people always will say, we built this country. When that's not true. Slaves built this country. Native people built this country. Asian people built this country. Latinos, and yes, white people. But if you go back and you look at your US history, it'll say Trail of Tears, but it doesn't tell you the 5 tribes that had to walk from Southwest Florida to Oklahoma, the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw. You don't understand that. And you don't know that they went where a lot of slaves were and why African Americans and Native Americans kind of intermarried at that time, because some of the Native Americans couldn't do the walk to Cherokee. So they just stayed and they lived in the slave houses. And they intermarried. And then again, when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed and a lot of African Americans walked from the South up to the North, that again, they walked right across Native Americans, reservations, and they intermarried. So when we don't understand our history, we have a blended thing of history. And so we do this crazy thing called Black History Month. And really go to your bookstores and your books are in a Black section, or they're not mixed up with the other books. And as long as we stay separate, we won't learn about each other and each other's history. Every day you use something. The fork that you use was founded by a Black man. The standard, the washer, the dryer, the ironing board, the golf tee, the horseback ride. There's so many inventions that African Americans made. The clock, heart surgery, blood transfusions, all were founded by people of color. But many people, the majority of people, do not know that vital information. Not only white people, even African Americans don't know that. And if you think that you haven't contributed, you always have your mind oppressed like, wow, we didn't do nothing. If you're always made to think that you're lazy and you're shiftless and you didn't do anything. You know, I traveled back to Africa about, I don't know how many times now, but when I went to Ghana, I went to the slave castle and it was such a revelation. I am so glad that my ancestors were able to take that journey. If you could see the elongated windows, if you could see the conditions of where people had to sit, and if you wondered why people didn't escape, women were placed in one area, men in another, female children, male children, and yet in every one of those slave castles, there was a church. There was a church where people went and prayed, the soldiers went and prayed. And they would take women slaves up to be what they call belly warmers. And they would rape them and violate them. And those women became impregnated. And this is where colorism even started in. They took those kids and they put them and shackled them in a different area from the other kids, yet they sold them all off. So when you don't understand that vital history that I have just given you, which is a little glimpse of my course called Race Relations, you tell people they've never contributed. They didn't do anything. We give them everything. And so America is built on an oppressive model. Everything that we do, we try to control. And when we give out money, that's why people were so upset about us giving out $2,000 during a pandemic. And people were trying to say, well, they can't spend it on this and they can't spend it on that. Have you ever really looked at the EBT card? You can't buy anything taxable. Yet during a pandemic, how do you buy a mask? How do you keep all of this disinfectant that you need to keep your family safe? We're oppressive. When you give somebody something and they always wonder what else. Yeah, some people will waste the money. Some people will take that $2,000 and do crazy things with it. But the majority of people will pay their bills. And so our institutions are oppressive. The way that we teach is oppressive, right? We have that model of controlling everybody, that power, to keep that power. And that's why right now people are fighting for the power of the vote, because they happen to see Stacey Abrams do something that everyone said was impossible. To bring a red state blue, and then in what, 6 weeks later, to bring 2 senators. And so now the backlash is happening because it's a duck walk, people. Remember this, as you move and you bring social change, 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, 3 forward, 2 back. You will advance, but it's going to be slow. Systems change is slow. Reed and Epstein talked about that in this book. But that doesn't mean you don't stop trying to change the system. You do the duck walk with them. Also, we know, if you look at history, that every time there are dark days, and these pandemics and economic and environmental and health pandemics that we're in, these are dark days. But it can be a renaissance for social work, because every time there's dark days, there's a renaissance, because people are tired and people want change. So social workers, it's important for us to kind of figure out, what do people want change? I was on a call today with the VA, and I'm like, look, we're in with the Biden administration. He is very complimentary of the VA. This is time for us to get some major things done for the VA. We can't wait. We have to be in there and ask. We got to do the ask now. You're going to see the same thing happen with our educational system. Kids who've been out of school for a year, and even those with Wi-Fi, and even those with access of the computer, they're going to be scared going back to school. Number one, their teachers are angry that they got to be back there. Number two, they've heard this story that if they go back, they could bring COVID to their parents or their teacher. What a burden we're putting on kids. They have to get used to sitting in a classroom again. Now, there's going to be a mental health impact on that. Social workers who are school social workers must pay attention that these kids do not get labels, because that's what we do. Attention deficit. Let's give them a pill. Let's do this. We cannot allow that to happen. Our nation has been in trauma, and we cannot rely on medicine to heal ourselves, because we know that will then create into a reliance on medicine and opiates, and we know what the predictables are. So we have to say to teach schools, and what I am saying is, don't shut your doors in the summer. Keep the kids throughout the year. And I know some parents will be upset about that, but the majority will not, because most parents are trying to scuffle and find a camp for their kids to go to in the summer. But we're about 3 years behind by being 1 year out. We were behind anyway, because other nations do have year-round school. But this is a time to correct ourselves, and we're going to need money on this in the townships, in the counties, at the state level, and at the federal level. We're going to have to retrofit schools with air conditioning, because you know in May they shut down the schools in the South because it's too hot. But we can't afford to have a group of kids who are carrying around this trauma. You've got to put more social workers in the school. That has to be there to deal with the problems that are going to pop up. Parents are at home. Some of them lost their jobs. We have, as I said earlier, these days ahead are going to be really difficult. You're all of a sudden let out, and then you want to go to your grandmother's house and you realize, oh my God, my grandmother died of COVID. And we had an online funeral. I never really got to say goodbye. Now I'm at her house. That is going to be emotional for over 500,000 people in the United States, because they didn't have the ceremony that we generally have around someone's life. So we got to get ready for it. The supply and demand of social work is going to be really, really difficult, because we do know that people who go into private practice, it's really easy to stack your practice up these days, because so many people with telehealth and so many people now are booked up. So if we deal with economics, the law of supply and demand, maybe this is the time to begin to say, hey, social workers need to make more money, because the law of supply and demand, you're going to want to have a social worker, and this is how much it costs to do that. So we have to look at that almost like a business model. Another question. I can go on and on. You all are in my class today. What can I say? Come on with the questions. And no question, or just comments.
Matt, this is James Anderson, Pennsylvania. How are you?
Hi, how you doing, Jim?
I'm doing well. I always love listening to you and communicating with you. I miss being in person with you. Looking forward to hopefully seeing you at our conference this coming September.
Oh, that's an ask.
That is an ask. I want to talk to maybe a little bit of a different direction here. A similar direction, but a different direction. I put this in the chat earlier, and this is a pet peeve of mine. Our profession often is not really well represented in the national discourse. And I see us as really needing to put forth an image of social work that the general public sees and recognizes. We need to be seen in all forms of media, okay? Movies, film, TV series, novels, articles. We need people writing op-eds. We need people advising Hollywood as to how to portray social workers in films. All of this goes to an ultimate long-term goal of building a level of professional respect and influence that other helping professions have already achieved, such as nurses, psychiatrists, medical doctors, other professions like accountants and attorneys. So that when a social worker speaks, rather than the response being, oh, it's a social worker, it should be, oh, it's a social worker. Our expertise is critical to what this country has to face. Our education and our training is unique among all the other professions. We define problem so differently than any other profession defines it. It's not inherent to a person. It's not inherent to an environment. It's the combination and intersection of those vectors. So I really see us as a profession needing to push in multiple areas, in multiple ways, redefining and reclarifying and building a new public image. So if you could kind of speak to that a little bit as well, I'd appreciate it.
Well, every point you said is 100% accurate. The other day I happened to be on the radio in Idaho on Fox News, right? So, we're starting to try to shift that paradigm. We need more people to do that. The national office sits 2 doors down from CNN. I keep saying to Angela McLean, you need to have your coffee in the CNN building, because we need to break into, and actually I met with some people in the news to say, why don't you call on social workers? Every time there's a trauma, we're out there in the community, why don't you call on us? And they're like, because we don't have a list of people to call. And so we have to change that. We've got to get that list into CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, and Fox News, right? We've got to get it throughout. We have to be able to do op-eds. I held a social workers on the vineyard, and part of it was we brought some writing people to kind of talk about where are you going to use your influence. We have to write the letters back into our local newspaper. But I agree. Matter of fact, one of the essential chats with Mitt is going to be on how we can impact social media. There are people have contacted that, even silly little things like a comedy show, and they want to play a social worker. Well, how do you play it accurately, right? So we're beginning to do that. I think that is something that we need to talk with CSWE. We need to really think of a curriculum that will support that idea as well, because we have to be the influence. Social media is here, television, movies, whoever you identify with. We were trying to get on I was just saying it earlier to Sam and Amelia that we were trying to get on the Ellen show for the month of March to be able to say, hey, social workers, we have to get profiled in all kind of things in all kind of arenas so that everybody understands what a social worker is. Because the statement that I make to most people, if you live long enough, you will access a social worker. Then that is guaranteed. If you live long enough, you may find them in your school. If your child is struggling, you may find them if you cannot even have a child and your wife is infertile. You will find them as you're struggling with the sandwich generation. You will find them when it's time to figure out what's going on with mom. You will find them in your own health cancer. If you're diagnosed with cancer or some kind, you will find a social worker, or they will find you. So the real reality is, what type of social worker do you want? And so every time I go on the Hill, I do my own research of some of the Congress people, because for whatever reason, I found that a large majority of Congress people, their grandkids are autistic. So I start right off with that. Well, social workers work with autistic kids, and I get their attention immediately. You do? Yeah, well, my grandson or my granddaughter, yeah, and we found it hard. Yeah, and we connect. So the other part that social workers have to do is do your homework of who you're going to go talk to, especially if you want to talk to an influencer or someone that's going to give some money so that you're able to carry out a program. And most people, because we're people and people are human, have different struggles that they have within their families. And if you can hit on that, social workers take care of that. Listen, I brought home, I don't know how many millions of dollars to social work profession when I was at BPD. Short story was the Hartford Foundation wanted to give money to social workers to work with older adults. And at that time, social workers were calling them elderly. We changed that to older adults. And all of the MSW programs were getting the money. And I represented the baccalaureate programs. So Esther Langston, who is a social worker, educator, said to me, they're going to give millions of dollars to MSW programs and not a BSW program is going to get that. And yet we work with older adults. So I said, okay, Esther. She said, so we need to do this. So we found ourselves at a bar in New York, and this is no lie. We were at the APM was happening, and they said, there's Laura Robbins. That's the woman who's giving out the money. You need to go talk to her. So I huddle up to the bar, introduce myself, tell the person who I am and what I represent. And I somehow say, social workers work with older adults. We actually work in a lot of nursing homes on the baccalaureate level. And Laura looked at me and said, really? And she said, well, do you mind if you come to a meeting with me tomorrow? We went to that meeting. I got appointed to be on the National Advisory Board. The next thing I know, they were giving millions of dollars to baccalaureate programs. That's how you bring change, right? It is a business. And I actually have an award named after the Mitt Joyner Gerontology Award. Gerontology was not my area in school. Child welfare was. The gerontology came because I brought millions of dollars to social work programs across the United States by just having a drink with Laura Robbins, who was the PI. And then later on, it went to someone else, and we were able to get millions of dollars to faculty. So you have to understand the part of social work, that micro, meso, macro, it's on all the time. You know, you're not dedicated to just micro or meso or macro. You figure out you do all three. And when there was an opportunity, hey, I know that some of the master's programs were upset with me because they would have gotten double that money. And now they had to share it with baccalaureate programs. And for a while, I was the only person who sat on the National Advisory Board for this, but I didn't care. So we had to get into the media. And so, Jim, I'm going to take your ideas. I'm going to ask you and anybody else to help think about and create a way that we can do that, because we need we got 55 chapters. We need a list of people in 55 chapters that could be on the news tomorrow. And you can't be hemming and hawing. You have to be able to get to your point, to know what to say, and get off, because you get 3 or 4 minutes of fame. So
I will say publicly here in this forum in front of all these witnesses, because I know a lot of folks, the idea of being on a national show and a national forum, a state forum, it scares the bejesus out of you. And that's fine, because it's not for everyone. You know this. I've talked to ABC News before. I've talked to different newspapers. It's an intimidating prospect, and I respect that. It's not for everyone. Like every other form of social work is not for every social worker. So if you're not comfortable doing that, don't feel like you have to. But I will say publicly, I will go anywhere, anywhen, speak to anyone you ask me to, or the board asks me to advocate for social work. I'll go on Fox News, I'll go on ABC News, CNN, MSNBC at a drop of a hat. I'm uncomfortable in that venue. Once you sit in federal court and get cross-examined, nothing scares you.
That's
Once
right.
you sit in a room, in a cement room locked with a convicted murderer, and you know that the buzzer is going to be 20 minutes before someone gets to you, you're not intimidated. And you know me, I get on my soapbox.
Right.
I will advocate, and I will pull in anyone who needs to be pulled in. So put me on that list. Any way I can ever support this issue in terms of putting social work on a national conversational level, I will always be there.
Okay,
So
we may pull you in on
feel
an
free.
advisory committee as well, because we've got to strategize. So I will remember that, Jim. I know that now. We hear of all these people that will testify to that. And I see many people in the chat might be interested in that as well. So we will do that. Let's do it.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Brianna, actually representing Georgia. And James, I really agree with what you said, and I want to offer my assistance as well. Even further than that, I think we need to get to a basis where we can get title protection in all states. I find myself in areas where I'm constantly advocating for social workers to be in places that are majority ran by other professions, like I work in forensic social work. And part of the problem is that they'll call LPCs, someone with a counseling degree or even education, the social worker, and our perspective, even how we handle the job is different. And I have to constantly explain that, not knocking their profession, but we just are held to a different perspective. So even if I can help somehow with that process, because that seems to be the issue I run into a lot when I'm advocating for most social workers to be hired, for higher pay for social workers, is that there's not a consistency in our title protection, at least in Georgia. I know some states have it, but it's not clear across the board. And I was hoping that with this pandemic and them needing people traveling to different places to help perform, there would be a little bit more like a universal somehow with licensing and things like that. But I think from a basis level, is just to even be able to say social workers are needed, is to be able to have the standard.
Right. What you do need to know is that we are working on those things in 3 ways. Number one, we work and meet with ASWB, which is the Association for Social Work Boards. They're the regulators, and they're the ones that decide, not NASW, about licensing. Your states have to pass licensing laws, every state, and that's why it's so scattered. And we've asked for reciprocity. I don't know if that's going to happen, but state houses are the ones that's in control of that. So it has to get on your state house. We've got to work with your legislators, in which the chapters really kind of do that work, and also ASWB. Once that happens, then you know we need to also work on title protection, that the people in every state, that when they use the title social workers, they have to have went to one of the accredited schools of social work. And the only person that accredits social work schools are the Council on Social Work Education. So that's an easy piece, but it's a very hard piece because it has to be passed again in your state house. We advocate and we will do the policies for that. We're entering into trying to look at an interstate compact where if you're in one state, you're able to use your license in another state. There's going to be some work in that. We just got prior approval. We're going to be working with ASWB to try to get at least 14 or 15 states to be a part of that pack. I was on a call this morning with the VA. The VA comes at it a different way, and that might be a way that might give us a little bit more leverage in the state houses. So make sure those that you vote for begin to visit those offices in your state houses where you do not have license and say that you want, this state has it, why don't we have it? And how some state people really look at that, if you can tell them people are leaving our state and going to another state, that's when the Congress people in the House begin to say, we don't want the better. I live in Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, we can leverage each other. Well, everybody's leaving and they're going to Delaware. Everybody's leaving. So we just recently got, I mean, our BSW's license, our master's is licensed, and now we have title protection. But we did that by giving them that information. Hey, they're leaving and going to New Jersey, and they're leaving and going to Delaware. So Pennsylvania didn't want to be left behind, because most of your legislators aren't social workers, so they could care less. So, and it's all about protecting the public. That's what license means. It doesn't mean anything, is that we protect the public, and they have to create an office within the state, which is your state licensing board office. But they get revenue from it, because the revenue they get from it is the CEs that everybody has to take every 2 or 3 years. So again, by modeling, look how much money this state makes, we could be making this as well. And that's kind of how we have to get that done. We're there, NASW is there to push data, to give you information that you need, but it's going to take work at that state house. And it's going to take your NAS chapter in Georgia to be on the move and to do those visits as well. Okay?
Okay, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Few more questions. I know we're running past 6:30. No other questions. We have no other questions, Amelia? Because I don't read the chat. It's hard for me to read the chat and look at people.
I know we have lots and lots of comments and questions. I was going to sit in that silence for a second to see if anyone wants to unmute themselves. If not, I'm going to maybe read one or two and be mindful of everyone's time. But if you'd like to unmute, please do now.
Hi. Well, actually, I just have a few comments to make. So I'm Portuguese, I'm not American, I'm European. And a lot of the issues that you've pointed out, I think are really focused on the American society. So for me, a lot of the things that you talked about, of course, I'm aware of some of them, but I don't think we quite grasp the level of the racial disparities that still exist in the US, here in Europe. We as Europeans, we don't really grasp the kind of systemic racism that still is so strong in America. So I think I just want to say, I don't know. Actually, I really don't know, because this is such a fascinating experience to be here and to just hear you out, you know.
Right.
But I would just like to ask you, maybe, what do you have to say to Europeans? How can we engage also in the American issues? You know, how can we? Because the true meaning of Ubuntu is this, right? It's to be connected, to help each other on all levels as much as we can. So that's what I'd like to ask.
So I would direct you to also go to the website ifsw.org. which is the International Federation of Social Workers, right? .org, because we have all of the representatives sits on that one group, and we talk about international issues and how we connect ourselves. Right now, we're working with China. You know, China is a communist state, and social workers aren't even allowed to practice. And so we kind of talk about positions there. We talk because countries are monolithic and they stay within, they're Italians, right? They are in Europe, French, but we do know that Black French and white French, there is some kind of thing, because slavery actually went all over the world. It just didn't come to the United States, but you all freed people earlier, right? But we also know that there is religion, that each country has their own issues whereby there is some oppression. And so we have different issues. You know, we're dealing with England with class, right? Who's born into what class decides where you are on that structure. Yeah, and so, you know, I just did some stuff for the British Association of Social Work. The Meghan and Harry story is taken worldwide, right? Because the bloodline was broken. Not just racism, the bloodline and the class line were broken. So anytime where there's any kind of oppression of anything, and I will say, I know when I was last in Europe, we talked about handicap accessibility, right? Because there is no such thing. You know, you can go up some steps. If you're in a wheelchair or whatever, you can forget about it. And so we that is the issue that we work with in IFSW, to make sure that people have access, right? So you look at it in the lens of your country. And you're right, racism, I mean, people come to this country and they're like, you all judge people on their epidermis? Really? Is that what you all do? And so it is important for us to kind of look at democracy and what does democracy mean, right? And why powerful
But
countries.
excuse me, that's also a good point, because
Mhm.
again, as an European, I really don't understand the two-party system.
Mhm.
It's completely, it doesn't make sense to me. In
Right.
Portugal, we have like, I don't know, maybe 10 different parties on
Exactly.
parliament.
Yeah. Yeah. So you know, it is of those same issues, you know, of course, men and women, but I would really tell you to get on that website, because I think you'll find it really rich. We also have international conferences. So we just had, the international issues are so complex. You know, we had an issue with, we had people on our board who were LGBTQ, and we were going to have a conference, or they were going to have a conference in Uganda. Uganda kills people for that, right? So we had to say, well, do we go? Do we stay? Do we go and protest? Some of our members were like, I can't go, because if I go, you know, I can be killed for that, right? I mean, I write in here. I mean, I write articles about gay men. I write articles about transgender people. If I go to Uganda, I'm going to die, right? So these are the struggles that we have when we look at the worldview, and this is how we make decisions. So does that help? And I applaud you for being on this platform, because that is something that I wish more people would do, is that they'd look at things. It's not about making the United States better. It's about making our globe better. That's what it's all about.
It helped. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I would like to say something.
Sure.
Hi, Amelia. Hi, guys. So my name is Taj Turner. I'm an intern at NASW New York State, actually, and I'm a senior in my BSW program. So I have two things to say. So, Sophia, my understanding of what your question was basically, being that you're not from America, you're not really aware of the racism that is occurring today. Because, you know, in history, it may seem as something as of the past, and it's the land of the free, you know, home of the brave, and, you know, this American dream. I have relatives that are in the UK and in Canada. And when we speak about these things, they're like, wait, what? That's still happening there. So I understand like the shock, you know, that there's, but there's a lot of literature out there that, you know, in your leisure time, you could read, you know, that kind of reflects similarly to what's going on, you know. And I'm just so happy that you're willing and you're here to learn about the struggles that are occurring here and just wanting ways to, like, you know, to see how you can assist, basically. And that's what I want to say to you. And then Ms. Joyner, so the topic of this Zoom session is the future of social work. And I don't know, I was monitoring the comments on Facebook kind of to see if anyone's going to ask a question. So I don't know if I missed it or not, but before we wrap up, I would just like to hear, like, what is your vision or mission of, like, what the future of social work will look for to you? You know, I sit on the Revolutionized Social Work Profession Committee, and we have, you know, our vision, but I just want to hear from everyone else that are, you know, across the states. You know, a lot of in the chat, it said that a lot of chapters aren't as active with addressing racism and stuff. So I just want to know, what is the future of social work look like to you? If you could share that before we just wrap up the.
So that's a question that I'm still grappling with. I want to be real honest about that. I sit on a social work futurist group and with futurist fellows, and we're all thinking through what should social work look like. We know that artificial intelligence is something that we're going to have to study. And we have to look at that again through a color lens, through race equity, because even on, you know, your Apple phone, you know, it reads to how light your skin is versus how dark your skin is. We also know that a lot of times when police go into people's homes, it's due to artificial intelligence. It's often wrong as it relates to people of color. So we know that we are on camera more than we are not off camera when you're out in the public sphere. And I don't think that we have been studying that enough in social work to really understand the ramifications of artificial intelligence. It's going to determine your credit score. It determines your access. And it's computers that through their algorithms have determined that. And we already know that bias exists in that. We know that bias exists in that of who gets a black card, right? The American Express had to come out and apologize. A woman wanted a black card and she made just as much, if not more money than her husband. The husband got the black card, the woman did not get the black card. And it was based on her marital status. So artificial intelligence is starting to determine who has access. So it is critical that social workers in the future understand and be at the table where those algorithms are being entered, so that they can make sure that race bias is not something, or sex bias is not something that is there. Also, we need to understand artificial intelligence ourselves, and how that will deal with counseling. And you know, right now you can talk to robots and get counseling. We also know that that is starting to spread over. So how we're going to handle that. So that's one thing that I think we have to pay attention to, the future of social work. The other, I believe, is we have to look at our future in terms of whether the United States will remain a democracy. The jury's still out on that. The insurrection happened, but things are undermining our democracy left and right. And so we can't necessarily sit here and assume that we do not fall victims as other countries. You know, democracies don't last that long. They do fall. And, you know, whether the United States, you know, this last census take that we had, we know that we took census during a pandemic. We know that people were undercounted. We know that the lines are going to be redrawn. We know that certain people are going to have control of the House based on that. So, you know, let me not sit here and say that that undercounting of that census, and, you know, census they only take it every 10 years. So we won't have an opportunity to correct that for 10 years. I've already spoken about some of the things that are going on in the State House. Peeling back of people's rights. We know that there's attack on the right to marriage, that people want to take that back, that it's only between man and woman. We know that there's attack on the rights for a woman to have an abortion. So I don't know what the future of social workers is unless we can maintain our democracy, because I am not really sure if we're going to be able to do that. You know, these next 2 years are critical. They're critical for us to get out there and get people registered to vote, to pay attention to what's happening politically, to make sure that fake news is not something that's repeated over and over again, to make sure that people are doing like Sophia, they're doing their primary sources. You know, so many people take news and you'll say, where did you get that from? Well, I got it from a blog. Got it from a blog? That's not a resource. Go back to your primary resource, figure it out. All of those things are being lost through the computer. You know, a lot of students cite Wikipedia, and Wikipedia is not necessarily primary sources. People write their own stories into Wikipedia. So I'm worried that, to be really honest, that the future of social work in these United States, it won't be United States. You know, I think we are at the precipice. We are just as rocky as we can be. The insurrection showed that. What the senators are doing right now is showing that we don't really have a two-party system, because we don't have one party that believes in democracy. So that should tell you something right there.
Good evening, Dr. Joyner. My name is Sherry, and I'm interested in your opinion on what retired social workers can do to continue to be involved and support and keep things moving, because there are many of us who want to continue to be involved. I myself try to do some things, and I'm just wondering, what is a group you think that we might be able to do to either re-engage or stay engaged and keep some things moving forward?
I'm smiling because I retired from social work in 2012. I'm president. Remember, it's a volunteer position. I don't get paid anything. So we need you in our associations, because I have the time as a retired person to be on all of these platforms. If a person was managing a real job or teaching, they wouldn't have the time. We need you, right? So come along to NASW State, NASW chapter, but there's also a lot of other associations that you could join in. We have volunteers with, I mean, I don't know how many groups that we have on committees. School social work needs you. I can place a million places of where you could be. In fact, we've asking our national office to do a timeline of when you first come into the profession, maybe with your BSW, till the day you die, the services that you can do at NASW, and the things that we're going to provide. I want to get into doing some international trips where social workers who want to travel to other countries and learn what's going on, but also even here in the United States. You know, we were, again, before this pandemic, taking NASW Alabama. We were bringing a lot of people down to Birmingham, Alabama, and Montgomery. We were going to go across the Pettus Bridge as social workers. We were going through all the Brian Stevenson's work. He has 3 or 4 key museums talk about racism and how it started and where it originated from, to get people to understand about lynching and go through the lynching museum, to do all of those things. I think that social workers can do that. And then they can go back into their communities and have a couple of these coffee clatches that I talked about earlier. So those are some of my ideas, and I would love to hear yours about how you would like to participate.
Great, thank you so much.
Awesome. Mitt, I want to be mindful of your time. Would you like to take some more questions, or would you like to see us wrapping up a little bit?
I think we can stop at 7. I'll go a half an hour over. Because I have an 8 o'clock call tomorrow and I need to have some dinner. Okay. But we have anything else?
If one last person would like to speak up, I'll have some church announcements that will for some follow-up, and we're going to have one last person. Yes.
Yes, I would like to just make a quick comment. Especially, I know a lot has been said about, you know, the views of internationals or people from Europe and other countries as to the situations with racism, institutionalized racism and stuff like that. I know sometimes standing from the outside, it's easy to look at something on the other side, especially for Europeans and even people from other continents, looking at the American situation, and what they see is probably Black Lives Matter and situations of racism being about, Black people being killed and stuff like that. But as an African descent, who is an American, whose ancestors weren't brought here by slavery, my own view and understanding is actually different, which is something that I would imagine that I would hope that some people would have a different view on, is that the racism and all this institutionalized racism, it's not only viewed through slavery, because this effects are also through colonization. So when we're talking about Portugal, France, and all these other countries, if you look at Africa, some countries, most countries don't even speak their own native language, because they speak English, they speak Portuguese, they speak French, and all this other things. And aside from the fact that affects, it's also in the treatment. So what you can see in these disparities and this discrimination and stuff like that is also in the treatment of Black people in all those countries. Because one thing, even speaking from personal experience, coming into America, one thing that I figured immediately was the fact that I wasn't seen as an African different from an African American. I am seen as an African American. They can't tell the difference between the two of us. Maybe if they see the name or they hear my accent, that's when they can tell the difference. So sometimes when we're in there, we don't understand what the other person is feeling. And I would like to say for Sophia and so many other people, one of the ways, it's just the same way we tell white people, the arguments that some people would say about white people in America would talk about saying, oh, there's no institutionalized racism in America. That's because they're not experiencing it, they're not going through it, And one of the ways that we can imagine that people can get to understand that is about learning about their own what's the word that I'm trying to look for here? Their own privilege. It's about learning about your own privilege. An example would be an African person or a Black person being on a flight from Portugal, France, or anything in the different places. They might treat them differently. They might not respond to their request and things like that the same way they would have treated a white person. And the truth is, many Europeans probably don't even know that. But if you're an European and you're in America or certain places where these discriminations are happening, you're just the same way an African is seen as an African American and treated the same way by the police, you're going to be treated with that privilege too. So understanding your own privilege, understanding all this that are happening around you, sometimes it's not about going as far as understanding what's going on in America, but where you are too, just like Ms. Joyner said, it's happening where you are too. It's just about what view are you looking at? What are you looking at? So I hope that's helpful and it makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. That was excellent. Thank you for those points.
That was awesome. Thank you for those points. I'm going to just make a few little kind of closing announcements, if you will, just touch on things and tell folks where they can follow up on these kinds of similar conversations. Then I'll hand it over to Ms. Joyner for a closing. I'm putting in a link to the chat box that I created while we were on the call that's going to reference a few things that everyone brought up today. Some of those things being addressing structural and interpersonal racism. So we have something called Revolutionize Social Work in the New York State chapter. This is open, free to anyone in the world. We have over 11,000 social workers actively engaging with us on a monthly basis. Our next one is this upcoming Tuesday, the 23rd, on the topic of racism and white supremacy and social work policy. I'd like to invite you all to come. A complement to that, we also have a program called Racial Justice Forum, which is breaking out into intimate small groups of mixed groups of social workers, BIPOC social workers, white social workers, whether they privilege, and doing self-reflection on these topics. It's important that not only are we talking about these structural changes, but ensuring that this is happening in our lives, both people with white privilege as well as BIPOC folks talking about how this is impacting people on a daily basis. So that is also at the link that I just put in the chat box. We have something called the This is social work campaign in the New York State chapter that we've just started building, and it was developed by one of our interns who is incredible. We have a lot of incredible interns here at the chapter. This is social work. So far, we have 33 in-depth interviews with social workers from across New York State. This is a multimedia campaign that we're working on, and we're going to develop it into something that we take to stakeholders, to legislators, to large social work employers to talk about social work skill sets and why social workers need to be invested in. So we ask that you check that out. We also have all of our following information on social media, Instagram, Facebook. Please continue to follow and have these conversations with us. Those are all the ones that I'm going to highlight from that link. I'm going to throw it in there again. I want to just say again that most of what we do at the New York State chapter is free and open to anyone. The only thing that we have a pay barrier on is our CE programming. Other than that, everything is open to all social workers, no matter membership, no matter where you are in the world. So please check out our website, check out the link that I put in there. We want to be serving social workers anywhere they are, no matter where they're at. So, and if nothing is resonating with you, but there's something you want to see at our chapter, our info email is on that link that I put in there. Send us an email and we're going to make what your vision is to happen. So thank you. And I'm going to pass it back off to Ms. Joyner for our closing.
So I just want to say thank you for letting me be here this evening with all of you. To feel free to call on me as your president at any time. I would ask that you really consider joining NASW. I always say, don't ask what NASW can do for you, ask what we can do, what you can do for NASW. Help us shape the future of your professional association so that it meets your needs, that it addresses your concerns. We now have auto renewal. We're looking at other ways to maybe have students break down the payment. Remember that, or for members to break down their payment. But the more people that we have, there are over 750,000, think about this, 750,000 social workers in the United States. And we have about 115,000 of those who are members. When we go to Washington, D.C., and the lobbyists are there from medicine, and the lobbyists are there from law, and the lobbyists are there from psychology, and our lobbyists are there. Every senator and every representative, the first thing they asked is, how many do you have NASW in my area? And we can say yes, because we have 55 chapters, so we're represented in every. And how many members? That's the question. That's how policies are made. I hate to tell you that. That's how policies are made. That's how distributions are made. We do not live in an equitable nation. So you have to go in there and grapple. We build coalitions. We will work with nursing. We will work with psychology. We're working with the VA to pass legislation. But to uplift social workers, if I could go in and say there's 750,000 social workers and half of them are members of NASW, the leverage that it gives us is far greater than 100,000. But I don't want guilt to make you feel that way, because I'm still going to go in if there's 50,000, right? Because we are not only about us. We are about bending the arc of justice towards liberation for all. That is our purpose. And that is why I love that our profession. That is why I came to our profession. So I want you to do a favor, write down and state why you came into social work. What is the change you want to seek? Put it on someplace prominent on your computer and look at that. And when you start to stray away and wonder, do I want to be in here anymore? Go back and look at that commitment you made. Did you achieve it? Is it done? Or is there more work to be done? When I graduated from Howard University, our whole class, not just social work, but the divinity school, the med school, the law school, undergrad, graduate schools, we all vowed to eradicate racism in my lifetime, in our lifetime. And I have worked on that, and I probably did it at that time just to graduate, get my degree, and get out. But at every turn of my career, and if you Google me, you will see that I always speak about racism, about equity, and liberation. It's a commitment I made to myself. I have grandsons, and I want to be the grandmother that sits back in my rocking chair. And when my young grandsons are able to drive, and they drive from Washington, D.C., where they live, to Westchester, Pennsylvania, I don't want to worry about them being pulled over, pulled out of a car, and a gun put to their head. My heart worries about that more than you can know. When I look at all of these mothers who've lost their kids because of the epidermis of their skin happened to be brown. So I am committed. And as someone said earlier, what can we do when we retire? When I retired, I didn't even call it retiring. I said on to next assignment, because the goal that I have written down has not been achieved. I still worry about my grandsons, and I want them to be able to be liberated so that they can continue to soar and have the advantages that they work hard to receive. And I don't want them judged by the color of their skin. So I thank you, and I look forward to seeing you on all of these platforms. As I said, you can always reach me at president@socialworkers.org. Let us know what you might need. And let me just say this, it's Social Work Month. So thank you. And before we leave, I'd like everybody to take their hand. I'm having everybody do this day. Take your right hand here. I can see you. I can see you, Terry Collins Green, and put it to your back and pat yourself on the back. Because very rarely do our clients or ourselves do that. Social workers have to learn how to reward ourselves. Thank you. Thank you so much. And have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.